This is Riley Meave reporting on behalf of the Wellington Historical Society for the Oral History Project. I'm with a fellow board member, Denis Quinlan, filming at Wellington High School. Now Denis, tell us a little about yourself and why you're here for the Wellington Historical Society's Oral History Project.
Well, first off, I'd like to compliment Laurie Cohn for putting together what I think is a great team to do a very worthwhile and needed job of getting the history, including yourself, getting the history down for what I consider a great development. Becomes town, becomes a great place to live, Wellington. I started out, I was working for the original developer of Wellington in the Bahamas as a vice president of development. They kept telling me about this wonderful place called Wellington, and I came over, and it was strictly in the planning stage at that stage. There was no work done, so I wanted to go on my own and explore. And I was halfway to Belgrade when I realized I had passed through what was a dream to these guys. And the big dreamer of the whole thing, I mean that in a very complimentary way, was a guy called Jim Nall, who was president of the original development company for Wellington. And he was the one who had the foresight. He saw what happened with Coral Springs in Broward County relative to Fort Lauderdale. Same, he looked for a similar area here, and he found the Wellington property, which had originally been purchased by C. Oliver Wellington in the 50s. And at that stage, it was, part of it was farmland, part of it was treed, part of it was still getting Oliver Wellington, C. Oliver Wellington had put together a deal with the South Florida Water Management District to develop the drainage. So it went from being a swamp to being, usable land and so on.
What did they envision this land to become? Was it residential, commercial?
I don't know what was in C. Oliver Wellington's mind. He probably just did it for investment. He did have a home here on Flying Cow Road, and it was called the whole thing was called the Flying Cow Ranch. For his initials was C. Oliver Wellington, C-O-W, and he flew a plane and had a landing strip where Pinewood is right now. So that's where it got the name Flying Cow Ranch. What his intent was, he was a very sound businessman, so I'm sure he looked to something in the future. He liked what I mentioned Jim Nall, who was the president of the company I worked for. He liked the plan that he put forward, and and that was part of his reason for selling to the company I worked for. He saw it being developed as in the right way and saw the future for it.
Well, what were exactly your roles in this development as vice president?
We all had many roles because there weren't an awful lot of us. There were no roads here or anything, so we were extending the roads into the community. I had a trailer where Publix is right now. It was just open land. And we started, the first building to be built in Wellington was what is now Tennis House within Palm Beach Polo. Do you know where that is?
Yes.
That was the first building, that and the little golf, we called it the golf shack, which was nearby. And then the extension of Forest Hill into the village, and digging with Lake Wellington, which wasn't a lake at that time, and Greenview Cove Lake. So that fill was used to create contours for the golf course that we also developed at that initial stage. So it was the infrastructure, installing the infrastructure, and developing the roads to the initial areas. The core was sold to people on the basis that they would build within a year. They had to build within a year. perimeter was sold on an installment basis, and the concept was develop all the infrastructure for the core and then work its way out towards the perimeter, which was what we were doing. And we were also, one of my jobs was to find builders to build out here, which wasn't that easy at that time. It was military trail was from there on out was the sticks as in their mind, but we managed to get some and build the first model village in 73, I think.
So when did people start to live in Wellington as a residential community? I know you lived here after you started working.
Well, yeah, there was nothing here till 70. Our first resident was in January of 75. And first two residents, Frank Brass was his name, Frank and Rose Brass and their daughter, lived on the corner of Riverside, not Riverside, but Forest Hill, and I think it's Riverside, that road that goes around there. And Bill Janes was the other. Frank Brass was a highway patrol officer. Bill Janes was a sheriff, so they were good people to have living. They moved in January 1st, I think, of 75. And then, we kept selling that core area, and then as it filled up, we opened up other areas. In the meantime, we had dug the lakes and put in the infrastructure and built some of the roads. Throughout.
So you previously told me one of your hobbies is watching horse sports. When did you start to see that development of us being a horsing community develop within Wellington?
Well, when Alcoa wanted to buy the whole property, and we found a partner who was more to our liking, if you like, at the time. He was the chairman of the U.S. Polo Association. Prior to that, we had been courting the PGA for this to be their home, and it never got to fruition. It goes so far. So he came in with all of that contact of being the chairman of the U.S. Polo Association. So we suddenly began to like horses. And I mean that jocosely, but no, and he had that contact, and that's where Palm Beach Polo became part of the community. Yeah. And he contributed. He was quite a dynamo.
But what made you stick around Wellington and continue to develop the community?
No, well, I was, prior to that, I was in the Bahamas working on a similar size development for the same company that I talked about, Breakwater Housing Investment Corp of Florida. So this became, for a while it was another work area, but then all of a sudden my boss suggested to me that I move up here in the early days, and it became home. And for somebody who had left his homeland and wandered all over, not all over, but over a lot of North America and a bit of South America and the Bahamas, it was nice to have a chance to be involved in the building of your own hometown. So that's what stopped my strays in their tracks.
Mm-hmm. And my last question regards the reason you've chosen to be here and your significant involvement with our historical society. So why do you feel it's important to document and understand Wellington's history, especially the early history, which you're so familiar with?
Well, several things. One of them is I mentioned Jim Nall, and I think he's been forgotten, and he was such a major factor. Obviously, he did for pecuniary development, his own addition to his own wealth and what have you. But he was a major factor, and I don't hear his name around, and a lot of people don't know about him. And he convinced the Wellington family that he could do it. He, as a corporation, could do it, and that it would be good. And I hope that whoever sees this will take my word for it that Laurie's done a great job, and I think it would be great if the more members she gets and we get into society, the better.
The more we'll learn about Wellington.
Yes, yeah.